Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since my most recent throwback album review, so here I am with another one, and it's the 1983 debut album by Death in June, The Guilty Have No Pride. So you may be asking who Death in June are, and to that I'll say that that was me until I randomly went looking for fairly obscure albums from the 1980s that might make for an interesting throwback review, and the criteria for that is literally just that I had no idea what I was getting into. But I was determined to review this album anyway, pretty much like I would for a new album, except with the context that I know this is multiple decades old. So back to that question, who are Death in June? Well, according to Wikipedia, they are a neo-folk group, with Douglas Pierce being the main one in charge, and apparently they changed their sound quite a bit throughout their career, moving away from the post-punk sound of this debut album. Now, I haven't heard their other albums, so I'm just talking about what I've read about this band. But the one thing that I read on Wikipedia that was a bit more concerning was the Nazi allegations because of some of the band's imagery and symbols, although apparently the band has denied this and say that it should not be taken at surface value. And the band literally kicked out a member for his right-wing leanings, and based on some other bands associated with this one, I think it's safe to say Death in June are anti-fascist. I mean, we'll get back to that when I talk about the lyrics. So, how is this debut album of theirs? Well, first of all, just to clarify, I'm reviewing the standard 7-track version of this album, and I'm going to start by talking about the lyrics and themes of this album, and keep in mind that because there's not a ton of press coverage I could personally find around this album, I don't really have much context for what the lyrics are about. Rather, I'm just going to try and interpret them myself. And I think I want to start with the overall concept of the album, which is a bit hard to fully figure out in terms of the details, but I guess I'm more talking about the album's title and what it means. The guilty have no pride. And it's worth mentioning that this phrase appears in the title track, which ends the album, and it's literally just that one line repeated that makes up the entire lyrics of the song, with the word only right before it each time. Only the guilty have no pride. And my initial thought is that this is something to do with the idea that even if you put out an image and pretend that you're doing all the right things, if there's something you know deep down about yourself that's extremely problematic, then it's going to eat away at you whether you want to admit it or not. I mean, the prime example that I can think of right now to explain what I'm talking about is Donald Trump. Okay, you know what, maybe it's not a good idea for me to try and figure out what's going on through that mind of his, especially considering that this is an album from the 1980s, decades before he was even on The Apprentice. But it's hard not to think about him, at least to give an example, when you can just see through the facade that he's doing so well. And you've got to think that even he knows how terrible a job he's been doing of running his country and what a terrible person he is. I use that one example, but it's a concept that extends way beyond that and is a pretty fascinating one to think about. If it's even a concept as much as it is probably a truth about the human mind. Although it might not be a truth that applies to everyone because we're all different from each other. But I want to take a bit of a different angle to approach this because the word only on the closing track really puts it in a different context. Are you saying that every non-guilty person is proud and confident in themselves? And that brings up the question of what the word guilty even means in this context. Now, you might argue that I'm overthinking this, but considering it's literally the name of the album, I do think it's worth exploring what they mean by it. And I feel like as a concept, it really could have been expanded on, or maybe just made a little bit clear what they're talking about. Kind of disappointing because it's a fascinating idea to explore. And just to be clear, when I talk about the rest of the album, I'm not really going to go back to this much because it doesn't really seem to tie in that much with the themes of the rest of the album. Yes, I've thought about how it might, and it doesn't really feel like it does that much. But I don't want that to discredit a lot of what they do really well on this album thematically. And keep in mind, I may be misinterpreting things, but I'll try my best. The album opens with "Till the Living Flesh is Burned," which seems to mainly be about the inevitability of death. That seems to be the overall mood of the track, where everything is portrayed negatively, with lines like, "In the teeth of life you die, in the jaws of death you live," where the impermanence of everything just washes over you, especially with the subtly cutting guitar riff in the background and the menacing bass line and drums. But there's certainly a social commentary aspect to the way this topic is approached on this song, as it mentions the Nazi brown shirts, which admittedly isn't something I know a ton about, although apparently it was a slightly more left-leaning part of the Nazi Party by comparison, albeit still very much problematic in a lot of ways. Excuse my lack of history knowledge, but I feel like it might be talking about how even well-meaning individuals can get caught up in problematic systems and be a part of the problem. although I very well may be misunderstanding it, especially since I don't know enough about the history of Nazi Germany. But going back to what I was talking about earlier about this band being anti-fascist, I think the lyrical content helps their case here as well. The following track, All Alone in Her Nirvana, seems to be describing someone with agoraphobia, who stays in her apartment all the time, or possibly a psychiatric hospital, although I think the former seems more likely. But what's fascinating is that at the end of the second verse, there's a line about a nearby man, followed by, I wish they wouldn't let the mentals out, which really brings up the question of what the scenario is, and where maybe she's a patient in a psychiatric hospital and wanting to stay there, or maybe she's afraid of a man nearby who could potentially harm her. And while you could argue whether or not the word mentals needed to be used there, I think the ambiguity is quite powerful here, and speaking as someone with a pretty severe mental illness myself, I don't mind it. Again, it's the kind of storytelling that recognizes the humanity in everyone, but also shows the bleak reality of fear that lives within a lot of people, and especially when you're a woman living in this misogynistic world where violence toward women is so often normalized, it really does make the male audience, such as myself, think about this topic while also recognizing that I'll never quite understand what it's like. Could the song have gone a little bit deeper on the subject? Yeah, but I still think it's pretty powerful for what it is. Then on State Laughter, the writing gets a little bit less specific and more feels like a vague look at someone's fear of being followed or haunted by something, where I think the lack of clarity in what's being sung about is very intentional. Although there also very much seems to be commentary on how powerless people's voices are suppressed and how little control most people have over a lot of important things, sometimes even one's own well-being. And it's horrifying to think that this came out over 4 decades ago and realize that a lot of this is still true to this day, where this song is a prime example of that. And while I'm not going to say it's the most amazingly well-written song ever about this topic, I think it does what it needs to do quite effectively. And the song Nothing Changes feels like it almost predicts that, where even if I wish the instrumentation and sound could really bring the feelings here to life more, it does make sense for this album to have a song like this one where it's explicitly about the lack of positive change that occurs despite so many people trying, and it's fitting following the previous song. Then there's only 3 songs left, and I already talked about the closing track, and Nation is an instrumental, a pretty damn strong one at that. So that leaves us with the penultimate track, Heaven Street MK2. I'm not exactly sure what the title means, but this song possibly seems to have some specific references which I personally just don't understand. For example, I'm not sure who Paul and Franz are, although they may just be random names that they chose, I'm not really sure. But it feels like a combination of a lot of the messages throughout this album, where life crushes you at the worst times and leaves you feeling helpless, but eventually we're all just going to die, where never has the line, "This road leads to heaven," sounded so bleak. But alright, I've talked enough about the lyrics. Honestly, there aren't even a ton of lyrics on this album, so I think I've gotten across my main interpretations of the lyrics that are here. But I also think the music can play a large role in helping these messages and feelings come to life. So how does the music match it? Well, it's worth mentioning I am trying to get into a lot of classic post-punk, and this is a sound and style that I like quite a bit. So do they do a good job of it? Well, I will acknowledge that I am a bit of an easier sell for this kind of thing musically, but even with that being said, I certainly think you can do much worse when it comes to this era of punk music, or even the same can be said nowadays. Now, I don't have enough context for all the post-punk classics to really be able to compare this to its time, but even if some of the snares sound a little stiff or underpowered, the drum production overall is really strong with the kick drums and toms, and the bass lines sound really good in the mix. Honestly, the overall production and mixing on this album are quite strong, and I think it captures the bleakness of a lot of the lyrics really damn well. Now, there's not a ton here in terms of catchy melodies or hooks, maybe a little bit, but for the most part this feels more like an album to just wash over you and make you think about the world, and unfortunately a lot of it still feels very relevant to this day. But it's also over 4 decades old, and either way, I think we can appreciate the really good music and writing on this album for what it is. I'm not totally sure that I interpreted everything correctly, but I did quite like this album. There's quite likely some strong Joy Division influence in the vocal style and production, and I think that influence is used in a pretty effective way that leads to a pretty damn good album. I'm not quite sure I'd call it great. It is pretty short and doesn't feel as fully fleshed out as it could have been, and even a lot of the individual songs feel like they should go harder or should resonate more. But the effort is clearly here, and even if it almost feels more like an EP than anything, I say almost because it does in a lot of ways feel like a full album. I'd say it feels more like an album than an EP, but I can sort of see it coming across as either. It is an album that's worth hearing if any of this sounds interesting. Sorry, that was a bit of a long rant there that I went on, but yeah, I mean, I didn't have a ton to say about the album overall, but I still got my thoughts out on it, I think. I think I explained it fairly well-ish, I would say. But there's also probably a lot here that I'm not picking up on. I just went on a little bit of a rant there toward the end of that review. But that's what I'm doing here right now. I'm just kind of going on and on and on. So overall, my overall thoughts on this album, I'd say it's a 7 out of 10 for me. And I'm glad I finally got around to reviewing it, even though this review was supposed to be posted over a month ago. I'm kind of curious to hear more of Death in June's music, and while I'm not sure exactly when I'll get around to doing that, it is still something worth thinking about because this was a pretty good first impression. And it's also only their debut album. But yeah, that's it for this one. Again, not a ton to say about this one, but I mean, it is also a pretty short album. I feel like I explained enough that I hopefully got across my overall feelings on the album, what I think of it, and sort of explaining my interpretations of it a little bit. But anyway, thank you for watching. Feel free to let me know in the comment section what you thought of this album and or what you thought of my review. Now, just a quick update regarding what else is coming up on this channel soon. So I do have more mini reviews planned. I will admit I've been very, very busy with work, so I haven't really had as much time to focus on this YouTube channel. But I am still planning a few more throwback reviews, hopefully by the end of this month. Although, I'm not even sure when this video is getting published. I'm assuming this video will be published in August, but again, I get busy with other stuff, so I may or may not be able to publish this video as soon as I'm hoping to. But anyway, thank you for watching. Sorry, I already said that. Regarding what else is coming up on this YouTube channel, yeah, I'm planning a few more throwback reviews. I'm not sure when they'll be posted. I may not get around to posting them at all. It's hard to say. I also have a few more individual album reviews of new albums that I definitely want to publish for sure, but I kind of want to go back and forth between both of them. If I can, in the next few days or weeks, I'm not sure when this video is getting posted again, but hopefully in the next few days, the next few weeks, I will be posting more individual album reviews, both throwbacks and new albums, and I also have a bunch of mini reviews that I want to work on. But I am also starting full-time school soon, so after that, the reviews are probably going to slow down. I'll give a bit more of an update soon. I'm sure I'll have more videos coming out before then, whether they're mini reviews or individual reviews of new albums or throwback reviews or whatever they are. But yeah, I think that's all I got to say for now. I'll give a bit more of an update soon when I can. But yeah, there are more videos coming. Again, I've been busy with work, so I'm not sure exactly when, but hopefully soon. Anyway, thank you for watching. Sorry for my long rant there. And I will see you all soon.